Alright, so today might be one of the final moments I get with my Canon EOS R because I might be selling it today and giving it to a new good home. So I thought I'd take the chance to maybe talk about the Canon EOS R, kind of my favorite things about it, my not so favorite things, as well as, what to look for when buying this in 2021. So without further ado, let's cue that intro and get this thing started. So I just wanted to preface this thing. If I had all the money in the world, I probably wouldn't be selling this camera. This camera is still really awesome, especially in 2021. There's a lot of factors that make it great. I think the number one is the price to performance that you get out of this thing. And since it is, an older kind of camera from, late 2018 or something, the price has significantly gone down. With that in mind though, the output that this camera has is, pretty much just as good as a lot of, the mirrorless cameras that are out in the market right now. And that's looking at, both the photography and video capability, look and insight at this camera. So with that in mind, let's go into the photography aspect of this first. This camera has a 30.3 megapixel sensor. Not only that, it is also a full frame mirrorless camera, and on the market right now, there's a lot of cameras out there, but to boast both a full frame as well as being a mirrorless camera is really impressive, especially still in 2021 where there's not an insane amount of mirrorless cameras out there. Yes, there is a good amount compared to back in 2018, but this still holds to be, a big one right now. 30.3 megapixels is a lot. You could take, really, really high detailed photos with that. If you think about it, an iPhone generally has, I think, 12 megapixels on the sensor, and that sensor too is really, really tiny. So to pretty much make that sensor bigger, as well as to add more megapixels, that makes this camera an insane camera for photography. Along with that, it's got a beautiful electric viewfinder on the top here, so that when you're composing your shots and looking through the viewfinder, you could both get a really steady shot as well as be able to see pretty much what that final image is going to look like, versus having that mirror to look through and it doesn't look exactly what it's going to come out to in the end. So that's really nice. I found that I'd never really had to leave the viewfinder, and that was pretty much my favorite part about going mirrorless, was everything could be done inside here, as well as using all the dials and all the buttons on the side of the camera. So that's pretty much, I think, the best parts of the photography aspect. Let's go into the video stuff. So for the video, this camera is a beast. It's been dubbed as the mini C200 camera. It's got amazing 4K. Alright, so this is me cutting in from the future real quick. I forgot to mention this when I first filmed this video. But another cool thing about the Canon EOS R, when you're recording video, there's this cool feature where you could pretty much make it a 10-bit video camera. The only thing is you gotta get one of these, and that's a field recorder. So if you plug this in, connect it to your camera with the right proper cable, you'll be able to film in 4K 10-bit video. Now, 10-bit video and 8-bit video, there's, videos out there that pretty much tell you the difference, but essentially what it is it's additional color or options to color when you have, higher, bit numbers. 8-bit, there's a certain amount of colors that the video can record in, but then 10-bit takes it a lot further, and exponentially it's a lot more. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you get the chance. And yeah, that was just me cutting in because I forgot to mention that in the original video. So back to the original video right now. So now if you're the kind of person who mostly exports and edits in 1080p, well, this camera gives you one of the best 1080p's you can possibly get. So that's a big plus right there. As well as that, this camera has really high bit rates in terms of video, which a lot of people tend to think, okay, video quality is just based on 1080p, 4K, etc., etc. But there's a whole range and spectrum of differences between these different 4Ks that each of these cameras have. And what kind of decides that too, and one of the big factors within that, is this thing called bitrate. Now bitrate, on this camera is really, really high. So that makes, the quality, a lot better, makes the images look, a lot cleaner and a lot sharper, as well as, just makes it overall, a lot better and more amazing looking. So that's a big plus, for this camera in comparison to a lot of the other cameras out there right now. With that in mind, you're getting this at such a steal. Pretty much 3 years has passed since this thing came out, so the price has gone significantly down. This, in comparison to the Canon R5, you're getting this for thousands and thousands of dollars cheaper, especially for the usability aspects of it. Now, I've talked, a lot about, the pluses and the awesome things about it, but there are, some kind of cons, but they're not, I don't know if you would really call them cons, because it all depends on who you are and how you shoot. So I think one of the bigger cons on this camera that a lot of people have talked about is the cropped 4K when you're shooting and recording in 4K. Now, the thing is, if you really think about it, in cinema cameras, most of the time they shoot in this format called Super 35. Now that is, a little bit smaller, and it's really similar to the crop of the 4K in the Canon EOS R. With that in mind, it's like, well, you're pretty much shooting in the same format as a cinema camera, so why does it make a big deal that it can't shoot in full frame? If all these, big cinematographers and filmmakers were able to shoot in Super 35, then it shouldn't really be too much of an issue to shoot in that, smaller cropped kind of aspect ratio within the 4K on this. So that's one thing to keep in mind. For me personally though, I just don't really have the budget to, invest in wider angle lenses and all these different, variety of lenses. So being able to have that versatility of that full frame when shooting in 4K and all these different, higher resolutions, that's what, kind of drew me in for the Canon R5. But in actual reality, it's like you can get away with using this thing easily. It shouldn't be, a determining factor why you shouldn't get this if you're considering it. Another thing, that is kind of a con of this camera is it doesn't have IBIS. Now, IBIS is that in-body image stabilization, which pretty much has, the sensor kind of moving in a way, I guess, when your camera kind of moves, and it compensates for that to try and get the smoothest photo as well as video for your camera. Now the Canon R5 has this, as well as the R6, but the thing is, you don't really get to fully utilize it unless you use RF glass with it. Now I've noticed, with my other, lenses, especially the ones with image stabilization, it looked, all right when it was already shooting out of the Canon EOS R. So I mean, it's not really a big deal breaker, especially for shooting photos. You just crank up the shutter speed a little bit higher and you should be good. And then if you're shooting video, you just gotta, steady your shot a little bit better. So I think the IBIS is, is a little bit more of a crutch for me nowadays than it is to actually get my film technique down a lot better, like with the Canon EOS R. And I think the final, kind of con with this camera is it doesn't have dual card slots on the side here. It only has the single SD card, which you could use up to UHS Type 2, which is still really fast for an SD card. That was one of the drawbacks in terms of deciding whether or not to keep this or upgrade to the Canon EOS R5. Kind of with more of the higher quality production works that I'm doing now, it is, nice to have that insurance and, peace of mind of having that redundancy of video files on the camera, so that in the event something goes wrong with one card, you have that backup as well. But in all reality, it's a really, really small chance of that happening, especially if you invest in good cards. So it's not really honestly a problem with this camera, but it becomes a problem when, people are saying, hey, I only want, camera shooters who have dual card slots. Then that's where you kind of tend to run into issues. But using this, on professional shoots, on like, portrait shoots and headshots and lifestyle and fashion, all that, this thing, works, marvels and stuff. This is, just pretty much a short review on the Canon EOS R from, the time that I've had it. I absolutely adore this camera. It is, you know, my first mirrorless camera. I still think it's amazing. And again, I would probably keep it if, you know, I had all the money in the world. But it's time to say goodbye to this camera and, you know, give it a good home, get it off of the shelf and let it go, you know, on more adventures with someone new. So with that in mind, you know, if you want to follow along and see, you know, kind of more of the adventures that I go on as well, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss out on future adventures, tips and tutorials, and more unboxings and reviews on camera and video stuff. And then comment down below if you have the Canon EOS R or if you have questions and you're on the fence of buying it in 2021. Hopefully I could help by answering your questions down below. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Goodbyes are never easy, but do you know what is pretty easy is subscribing and pressing that button down below. It helps me out. Thanks. Has it stopped recording now? Or